Are we mic'd up now? Ed was kind enough to not mention the time we went to the Gulf Coast together, so I won't either. Just remember, Ed, that no matter how far you go in life and no matter how high you rise, the size of the crowd at your funeral will always depend on the weather. Okay, let us see what we're doing here now. Considering where we are and what we are doing here and all of that, it seems to me to be appropriate to begin today with a reading from the Holy Scriptures. I'm serious. Gideon Bible. You know, every college professor has about 30 of them because you're going to be in hand. You know, of course, the happiest and saddest time in a father's life is when his daughter comes home from a weekend. The happy time is when he finds a Bible in her suitcase. The sad time is when he discovers it's a Gideon Bible. I'm reading from the book of Acts, chapter 8, verse 26. Now an angel of the Lord spoke unto Philip, saying, Arise and go toward the south. And in Alabama, you know that when you go toward the south, you go to the Redneck Riviera. A couple of things real quick. It's kind of the scope of this study. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is Alabama's Redneck Riviera, but when I did the book, I had to figure out exactly what was going to be it. Since that's my book, I can call it what I want to. And I first thought about including Mississippi, but Mississippi is another world. Dauphin Island, I didn't include it because Dauphin Island really is a lot like the Sea Islands over in Georgia. It's privately owned and all of that. And so I decided I would start at the mouth of Mobile Bay and I would go east to St. Andrews Bay, or to basically to Panama City Beach. That this would include the areas that I would be most interested, not only be most interested in, but also would reveal all of the things that I wanted to talk about with regards to it. Now the other is the question of redneck. Now I could probably poll this group and pretty well get a consensus on what a redneck is. They'd be Southern, working class, white, probably racist, maybe a little bit of a buffoon. But the best description of a redneck that I've ever gotten came from the late, great Billy Carter. Billy Carter was on the Johnny Carson show one night, and he made mention of a good old boy. And Carson looked at him like he didn't know what he was talking about, because he didn't. And he said, "You mean a redneck?" Billy said, "No, I mean a good old boy." And Carson said, "Well, what's the difference?" And he said, "Well, a good old boy rides down the road in his pickup truck drinking a beer. When he finishes, he puts the can in a little bag. A redneck rides down the road drinking a beer, and when he finishes, he throws the can out the window." And that really is a distinction that's important, because it's that's antisocial aspect, you know, that not being bound by the conventions of decent society, you know, my kind of people. Add to this Jeff Foxworthy's observation, which I think is, you know, Foxworthy's made a living out of "You Must Be a Redneck If," and it's a more sympathetic portrait, but he says that rednecks are characterized by a glorious lack of sophistication. I can go with that too. But who put them together? Redneck Riviera. The earliest I've found them connected was a bar owner and singer by the name of Shine, who was down at Gulf Shores. The problem is he's no longer around. Nobody can say where he might be. He may not be alive anymore. And the song that he sang that had the term Redneck Riviera in it has been lost. I'm still hunting him, so if any of you know where I can find him or find out something about it, well, there you can have that. But the first time it was in print, as best I can tell, was in 1978 in the New York Times, no less. Howell Raines, a Birmingham boy, was down to write a piece on the doings going on of former University of Alabama and then pro football quarterbacks Richard Todd and Kenny Stabler, who were down there on what he's described as a deserted stretch of beach that some Alabama wags call the Redneck Riviera. Now, the stretch of beach that Raines was referring to began just west of Gulf Shores and continued on to the Floribama. That's my daddy. He died about a year and a half ago, but I took him there in the 80s, and he walked in and looked around, and he said, "Thank God there's still a place like this." It's changed a little bit, folks, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But anyway, the Floribama sits on the line. Most of it's in Florida to take advantage of more liberal liquor laws, but it's still a place where the slogan, "Let's do it on the line," is sometimes taken as a challenge. Raines's Redneck Riviera was a sprinkling of vacation cottages, one of them in which one of the owners wrote, "The breeze is blowing, the bourbon is flowing, and life is easy." There were also honky-tonks, picturesque, if maybe a little seedy motels. There were shacks on pilings, cafes that served smoked mullet, presided over by sunburned refugees from civilization. Here was a place where you could find people like the writer Robert Jones described that he found at the Bear Point Marina. He described them as sunburnt men, skinny, in Levi's and work shirts, half shot with drink, and wearing the faces of Confederate dead in Matthew Brady photographs. I wish I had written that. Maybe someday I'll claim that I did, but that's a beautiful description. Others he found, of course, were like Kenny Stabler, who once told a reporter who asked him if all the stories about him were true. Kenny said, "I live the way I live. I don't give a damn if anybody likes it or not. I run hard as hell and don't sleep. I'm just here for the beer." Which I think ought to be on a T-shirt, and it might be sometime. Now, prior to World War II, Alabama's Redneck Riviera, and this is Gulf Shores about 1948, survived on fishing and a trickle of tourists from not too far away. Vacationers came down to spend a week, stay at a few mom and pop motor courts. They'd swim a little, fish a little, drink a little, eat raw oysters, buy something tacky at a local shop, and generally do things they could not do back home, or at least would be if they tried to. That is one of the real attractions, is to be able to get away from the social conventions that were back there with preachers and wives, and well, you have to take your wife with you, I guess. But it's a getaway place. After the war, their numbers increased. Americans' attitude toward leisure was changing. Prior to World War II, vacations were for rich folks. Working class folks worked. You didn't get time off. And in the weekends, you went hunting on Saturday and you went to church on Sunday. But after World War II, the vacation idea became part of the American way of life. The idea in the past was that, a vacation was akin to laziness, and laziness would lead to indolence, and indolence would lead to sloth, and you get slothful and you're sorry as gully dirt. But now, vacations became something you worked for and earned and took. And so Southerners took the biblical admonishment and went to the South. They drove down military-improved roads. They came mainly from Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and brought with them the culture of the post-war rising middle-class South. They were children of the Great Depression. They were hardworking and frugal. Wartime experiences had taught them that life was short and to be enjoyed. Raising their baby boomers, they coordinated trips with the children's vacations. And these folks expanded accommodations accordingly. Efficiencies in cottages were especially popular, for restaurants were few, and for most visitors a place to go for the occasional treat, not for every meal. So they came loaded with groceries, and many a family lived a week on fried bologna sandwiches and anything they might have caught from the Gulf. On the whole, these folks fit nicely into the local population, whose racial composition, experiences, and values were not unlike their own. Vacationers appreciated the live and let live attitude of shrimpers, oystermen, charter boat crews. They were happy with the wharfside bars and cafes that served year-round residents. The idea that these establishments should change to cater to tourists was alien to their way of thinking. They were down to enjoy the coast, not to remake it. Slowly the tourist economy grew, And by the mid-1950s, the weeks between Memorial Day and Labor Day, the season, was a cash cow for the locals. But come September, some folks shut down and lived the rest of the year on what they had made in the summers. Others found winter jobs and waited. While most visitors who came to the coast rented, a few decided to invest in the region. And pretty soon, small developments began to dot the landscape. Designed to appeal to more upscale clientele, these communities often included covenants that assured buyers that no tent, trailer, shack, outhouse, or temporary structure would be put on the property, that no noxious activities or offensive noises or odors would be permitted. I've known a few offensive noises and odors, but anyway. And since the buyers came from the racially segregated Lower South, the covenants often specified that the lots would not be, quote, sold, leased, or rented to or occupied by any person or person other than the Caucasian race. Although domestic servants, white or black, were permitted. This was the Redneck Riviera. No one called it that then. It was just Gulf Shores or Orange Beach or simply the beach. It was small town, segregated south, without the racial diversity you found inland. Along the coast, except for occasional colored beaches, colored in quotes, black faces were few. However, there was more going on besides middle-class, family-focused fun and entertainment. In February 19, the Mobile Press-Register sent out a warning that, quote, several hundred Alabama teenagers were expected to pay a visit to the local beaches. This was a trend that had been growing for some time, all along the coast. And in fact, over in Panama City, it inspired civic groups in that area to organize recreation for these teenage visitors. But the fun the civic leaders envisioned, contests of skills like find the penny in the pile of flour, only confirmed that adults didn't have a clue. The one nod to reality was when Panama City Beach City Council discussed asking local stores not to sell beer during spring break. The idea was killed very quickly. Not that it would matter, because the former police chief of Panama City Beach told me that those kids could find beer in Saudi Arabia. So, the youth invasion accelerated that year, 1960, when Hollywood released Where the Boys Are, a movie about spring break in Fort Lauderdale. Now, up until then, only the hardcore went to the beach in March. It was cold, it was windy, at least the northern Gulf Coast beaches. But now, and by the way, also back then, AEA and GEA and all that just were only 2 days. So there wasn't much time. Now, all of a sudden, it became cool to be cold. And kids started going to the beach. If I show some pictures in here and you recognize some people, I think it'd be probably just be best to keep it to yourself, okay? I know him, Margaret. Nope, never mind. Communities along the coast now have to make a decision. Are you going to try to get the income from the invasion, and is it worth the hassle and the damages? And as they would do for time forward, coastal folks took the money. Another season is born. From mid-March to mid-April, high school and college students ruled the coast. Then they went home, leaving motel owners time to clean up for the families to arrive. Accommodating this expanding tourist market, more and more motels were built. They were of a single plan, on or across the road from the beach, 2 or 3 stories high, less than 100 units, maybe a cafe or bar, but at least within walking distance to one. Close to something for the kids, putt-putt golf, an amusement park, or a hangout for the teenagers. And there were more and more and more of them. It got to be at the point where the same people came down at the same time of year, and there were motel reunions when families would get together and say, have a great time and then see you again next year. And because one could count on tourists from coming from almost the same areas, you had a pretty good idea of what amenities you should provide for them, particularly newspapers. There were motels that knew when the Atlanta folks were coming, the Atlanta Constitution would show up. When the Birmingham folks were coming, the Birmingham News would show up, and so on. Well, now, as the region grew, so did the offsprings of these pioneers. Baby boomers, children of post-war passion, they were part of the youth rebellion, but with a southern twist. Along with the Beatles and the Stones, they grooved to Leonard Skinner and the Allman Brothers. I don't know that. Never mind. In the clubs, they danced to music like they danced to in fraternity parties back in Tuscaloosa and Auburn. Sometimes the bands were black, but the dancers were always white. Alcohol, beer in particular, was the drug of choice. Though before long, the ever-vigilant Mobile Press-Register reported that the scourge of reefer had arrived, and a person who smokes the weed, quote, there is nothing he is incapable of doing or saying, and in some instances the user will run amok. Well, doing or saying anything you wanted to and running a little amok was what whole idea about going to the beach was for anyway. So in a way, what the Mobile Press-Register's warning was something of an advertisement. Down they came. By the 1970s, the Alabama coast consisted of a few family-type motels, a state park with campgrounds and a collection of charter boat outfits, bait shop, piers, docks. Scattered in between was a hodgepodge of vacation cottages belonging mostly to South Alabama folks, and as fine a collection of beach bars as you could find anywhere on the Gulf. The L.A. Pub and Grub, the Bear Point Marina, the Pink Pony, the Seagull Lounge, which was also known as the Dirty Bird, and of course the Floribama, where the international mullet toss would soon exemplify redneck recreation. That's my buddy Steve. There's too. Word about the toss. The last weekend in April was the slowest weekend of the year. The spring breakers were gone. The snowbirds were gone. The families hadn't come in yet. And so they were sitting around, what are we going to do to liven this up? And somebody said, let's have a contest. Now, what sort of contest? Well, there are two stories about this. According to one story, Jimmy Lewis, one of the musicians down there, had been out west where they had cow patty throwing contests. And so he suggested, why don't we throw something? Okay. What to toss? Well, mullet. Now, why? Well, first of all, mullet are said to have magical properties. All right. You understand now, mullet is not a fish. Yeah, no, it's not a fish. No. But in Florida ruled it was not a fish. A couple of good old boys down in the Tampa area were caught catching mullet where they weren't supposed to be catching mullet. They carried them into court, fishing without a license. And the two boys got themselves a good lawyer who later became president of the Florida Senate. And he argued that, and he had 12 good men and true, many of them who had fished for mullet. And he argued that the mullet's not a fish, so they couldn't be arrested for fishing without a license. What is a mullet then? Well, it's a bird. How do you know it's a bird? Because it's got a gizzard. The mullet has a gizzard, and the folks in the jury said, right, no, that's it. Not guilty, so they went back to fishing for mullet, which aren't fish. No, but mullet is like the folks at the Floribama. They operate in schools. They go around like this. And they jump. And they fall back in. And, regular fish jump and go back in head first. Mullet just plop back in there. Scientists have been trying to figure out why the mullet jump in a school like this. They finally, after a while, decided it's for the hell of it. Now, Jimmy Lewis tells a different story, though. He said, I sat with Jimmy Lewis in Boys Town. Boys Town's an area right across from the Floribama where Joe Gilchrist let the musicians put trailers and things because he didn't want them on the road driving after just let them walk across the street. So we sat over there, and Jimmy said that really the way it happened was this. It came to me in a fit of narcosis. Said I got stoned one night and fought it up. And that was... All right, but anyway, it's a wonderful exercise, and I recommend that you all do it. What you need to do, you'll notice Steve standing in a circle there. You stand inside the circle. You pick your mullet up out of the bucket. It has to be slick. You cannot put sand on it. You cannot have gloves. You take your mullet. You stand in the circle and you throw it down this alleyway. Down there are the mullet girls. This was taken earlier in the contest when they had more clothes on. And so you're throwing it from Florida into Alabama, hence it is the interstate mullet toss, you see. They measure your mullet, but you have to go pick it up. They're not going to touch that slimy thing. The mullets afterwards are fed to the seagulls. And it's a wonderful family bonding experience. That's my son. He was 16. That is Water. His mother was not happy about the whole thing anyway. But this picture was in Southern Cultures magazine when I did an article in there. And my son saw the picture in the magazine. He said, you think she'll see this and she'll give us a call? I said, honey, I don't think she reads Southern Cultures. But then again, she could be a history major from Emory. You never know, okay? So anyway, this is how the dullest weekend of the year becomes one of the busiest. And a couple of years ago, the records were broken when they served recently the equivalent of 16,000 cases of beer in 2 days. All right. Well, the Alabama Strip distilled the Redneck Riviera to its essence. Robert Jones, the writer for Sports Illustrated, visited there, and he described the folks that he found down there in 2 categories. Category 1, he said, were upper-crust, matronly Rotarians with cash register eyeballs. And Category 2 was the Stabler gang, raffish, sunburnt, hard of hand, tyrannical of glance. Then came Frederick. On the evening of September 12th, 1979, a year after rains rode about the region, Frederick hit the Alabama coast with 120-mile-an-hour winds and a record storm surge. Gulf Shores and Orange Beach sustained heavy damage. To most observers, the future of the Redneck Riviera looked anything but bright. But looks can be deceiving. Frederick taught coastal folks a lesson. Storms destroy, but they also clear the ground for builders to build. Before Frederick, Gulf Shores had 1 chain motel, a couple of small condominiums, a few restaurants, bars, and beach cottages. There was 1 bank, no supermarkets. The hurricane leveled most of it. Then came the easy credit and looser regulation of the 1980s. Banks had money to loan, and baby boomers now in their 30s and approaching their 40s were ready to borrow. Having learned to love the beach in their youth, they were ready to recapture the magic without sleeping 10 to a room. So they bought some of it. Folks who had seen their cottages wash away were wondering how they could rebuild, were being offered more money than they ever dreamed of for their little piece of sand. Some took it, some didn't. Developers then pieced the pieces together, and the condominiums and resort hotels began to rise. In less than 2 decades, the quiet beach towns of Gulf Shores and Orange Beach became the destination for over 1 million visitors a year. Where there was beach property to be developed, there were developers there to develop it. With few environmental controls and with county government in the hands of inland agricultural interests who cared very little for the coast except for the tax money, the foxes were loose in the henhouse. Folks paying big bucks for a condo were generally not the sort who came down to redneck it up. They may have been once, but not anymore. And the people who bought into that lifestyle were a far cry from those who bought into the beach 3 decades before. First with money from the hot stock market of the 1990s, then with low-interest loans when the dot-com bubble burst, baby boomers began to buy the coast that a baby boomer generation of developers was down there trying to sell. So up went the condos. And up went the places for recreational shopping and eating, leisure activities such as the usual panacea golf, all to keep owners and visitors entertained. At the same time, the rapid rise in property values made a house or a condo on the coast a much better investment than the intemperate stock market. And so it was that the Redneck Riviera became an investment opportunity for some and a place of calculated, carefully controlled leisure for others. Meanwhile, more and more of the sort of people who came down to the region that had once come down to the region were priced into a shrinking selection of motels and condos. And the places they once frequented, the bars and the seafood joints, were replaced by in vogue eateries with designer decor and ferns. I saw it happen. On down the beach, close to where my folks have where I have a place, I guess now, there was a Cajun restaurant. It was back off the beach. It was back on Highway 98. It was real popular with the locals. Had hats all over the ceiling. You come in, they take your hat and staple it up there. And I went there one night with my wife and friends from Atlanta. The lady from Atlanta was a lovely lady. She was dressed to the nines. She had a J. Crew sweater, Lands' End slacks, a Dooney and Burke purse that probably cost more than a week's wages for the waitress who came up and said, "What'd y'all like to drink, honey?" I love waitresses that call me honey. And so I ordered beer. My wife ordered beer. My friend ordered beer. And the lady said, "Do you have Chardonnay?" And the waitress looked at her and smiled and said, "We don't have no foreign beer here." It was a great moment. About 3 weeks later, I went back for lunch and they had a wine list. Okay, it was a chalkboard and it said, "We have wine, red, white, and pink." But it was the beginning. It's getting too fancy for the locals. The business dropped off. They tried different things. They paved the parking lot. That didn't help. They started serving appetizers. That didn't help. Today, it's gone. It wasn't fancy enough for the new ones coming down, and for us old folks, it was too much. You remember the folks that Sports Illustrated writer found when he visited the coast in the 70s, the upper crust matronly Rotarians with cash register eyeballs, and the Stabler gang, raffish, sunburnt, hard of hand, and tyrannical of glance? In the late 1990s, historian Emery Thomas looked at what they had become and decided those two types had mated. And they had produced a generation of raffish Rotarians, pirates with cash register eyeballs, and hard-handed matrons. He was right. Yet in their own way, the raffish Rotarians and hard-handed matrons were just as freewheeling as the less sophisticated rednecks they replaced. They just had more money and built better. State and county building codes were tightened, largely from lobbying from the tourist industry, and older construction was grandfathered in and sat there waiting for the next big blow. It came with a vengeance in September 2004, when Hurricane Ivan blew over the top of Orange Beach and tore Raines's Redneck Riviera apart. It did more damage than Hurricane Fredericks because there was more to damage. A year later, Hurricane Dennis followed much the same path. So during the first decade of the new millennium, the Redneck Riviera was a region in transition. Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, once playgrounds for people like the Stabler and his gang, became get-rich investment opportunities for aging baby boomers whose children were out of the nest and who had money to spend. Aided by liberal lending policies, pliable local governments, aggressive developers, and hyperactive real estate agents, boomers began to buy pre-construction condo units, resell them at a profit before a nail was driven to someone who would sell it again, in one case 5 times before anyone got a set of keys. Though this flipping was a national phenomenon and even spawned a TV reality show, along the coast it generated what one person called condomania. One enterprising agent organized his flippers into what he called the Dolphin Club. Cute, no? Yeah. So many of the remaining mom-and-pop motels, vacation cottages, and low-rise condos were replaced by double-digit storied condominiums whose absentee owners planned to watch their investment grow while they made mortgage payments by renting to snowbirds who came down in the winter and anyone else who could pay the price in the summer. The snowbirds. For years, people tried to get them to come down, help the local economy in the winter. Now, these folks who finally started coming down are not your well-heeled vacationers who come down to Fort Lauderdale and Miami. In income and attitude, they were an awful lot like the middle-class Southerners who came to the beach after World War II. But rather than redneck it up, they were more inclined to sit by the pool in the sun, play cards at senior centers, many of them open just for them, hit the buffet at the early bird special, and maybe drop by a local bar for a beer before bedtime, which always came early. Full-time residents were of a mixed mind about them. Chambers of commerce full of raffish Rotarians loved them and the money they spent, although they always wished they would spend more. The running joke is that a Canadian comes down with a white shirt and a $100 bill and doesn't change either. Locals complained that the old and northern drove too slowly, clogged up the checkout lines at grocery stores, and were rude and pushy, and more than anything else were Yankees. which explains the popular bumper stickers which says, if this is snowbird season, why can't I shoot one? There were other tensions as well. The very culture that gave rise to the Redneck Riviera and its antisocial activities was also a culture full of churchgoers who wanted to visit the beach for families' activities while they were there. For them, family activities did not include alcohol and all that went with it. However, once they arrived, they found that for every goofy golf place, there was a bar. For every goofy golf place, water park, carnival-like attraction where mom and daddy and the kids could ride rides and play games in friendly surroundings, there was a bar or a club or a liquor store or a lounge sometime in the very motel that they were staying in. What is a Christian family to do? Why, go to a Christian retreat. During the 1980s, a number of large churches in Atlanta and Birmingham bought old motels, refurbished them, turned them into places where other churches would feel safe taking their youth groups. Local churches encouraged this and opened their doors to the visitors. More conservative in dress, no bikinis. Often a t-shirt over even what you are wearing. Organized activities, they represented an aspect of white southern middle class that those who focus on the Redneck Riviera's redneck reputation often miss. By the way, some of you may have read recently that they are now holding church services at the Floribama. I will be investigating this shortly. Serious question about what kind of communion beverage is served. And then there's the question of who owns the beach, which really wasn't a question back during the Stabler era. There was plenty of beach to go around. And those seeking a spot on the sand seldom had any problem. Sometime a motel would tell you you couldn't use their access point, but you just go to another one and walk back in. However, as more and more people came to the beach and set up their umbrellas, beachfront homeowners began putting up private property keep off. Because under Florida and Alabama law, the person who owns beachfront owns down to the mean high tide line unless there is something in a covenant that says it's otherwise. Well, when the storms of 2004 and 2005 hit, it eroded the beach terribly. And this caused all sorts of problems with insurance and other structures and so on. And so the states, Alabama and Florida, stepped in to restore the beach, pump sand back in. But a number of homeowners said they didn't want that because if it did, it would be a private beach. You use private money, and they sued. Lawsuits are great fun down there. They just go on all the time. When in doubt, go to court. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that if the state renourishes the beach, rebuilds the beach, it is a public beach. The ongoing controversy now is around people whose beach was not rebuilt and renourished. Can they still declare it private? Alabama and Florida, this is going to be an important case, important resolution. It's not a case right now, within the next 2 decades. Yet of all the culture clashes that were going on along the coast, the one that seemed to capture both the differences and similarities between the folks who created the Redneck Riviera and the ones who were shaping it today took place in the spring of 2008 when the town of Orange Beach decided to build a second public boat ramp. Now, in many ways, the folks who put the Redneck into the Riviera expressed themselves best in their boats. They loved their boats. They took good care of their boats. The person who owned it, whether it's a John boat that goes back into the bayous or whether it's a boat you can take out into the Gulf, it's an extension of their personalities. Whether built for speed or built for fishing or built for both. The boats were lovingly maintained and treated with respect. But boats need water. And most of the boat owners did not have a dock of their own, so they depended on public boat ramp, the common man's marina. Orange Beach had one public ramp, and parking was limited. So when the weather warmed and the boats arrived, the trucks and trailers spilled out of the lot onto the shoulders of the road. Neighbors complained about the noise and the traffic, and there was pollution. The ramp was on a slow-moving bayou, so gas and oil that was spilled in didn't flush out. Environmentalists, whose influence on the coast was growing, complained about this and called on the city to do something to clean up the mess. The city had a solution. Off east of the town was a plot of waterfront land, city-owned, with access to the pass that led to the Gulf. It was undeveloped, big enough for a ramp, parking lot, and restroom facilities. Perfect. Only it wasn't. at least not to the owners of an upscale condominium close by and the mini mansions on Ono Island, which you see over there. They protested. Told the city that the noise from the rednecks in their boats would spoil the peace and tranquility and their quality of life. Now, the city council knew that most of the condo and Ono owners were not residents, and therefore they didn't vote. On the other hand, many of the boaters lived in town, so plans for the ramp went ahead. So the opponents tried another tactic. Stop the ramp to save the beach mouse. Now, in recent years, federal protection laws, environmental protection laws, had been used to stop a number of projects and change the habit of beachgoers. Out on the Fort Morgan Peninsula, a development was put on hold to determine if the endangered mouse habitat would be threatened. If the mouse could stop work at Fort Morgan, the opponents of the ramp reasoned, it could stop work at Orange Beach. Now, up until then, the folks on Ono and in the condos had shown little, if any, interest in saving the rodent. But overnight, they became advocates for the endangered little rascal. And to help them in their crusade, they brought in an environmentalist who they were sure would be their allies. But it didn't work out that way. When the environmentalist appeared before the city council, they testified that the ramp wouldn't endanger the beach mouse because there were no beach mice where the ramp was. Surprised but undeterred, the opponents announced that they would catch some mice at another location and turn them loose there. Won't work, said the environmentalist, because the feral cats will get them. Just as they ate the mice that were there once before. You can't restore the mice until the cats are gone. Now, feral cats had been a problem down there for a number of years, but this bunch of feral cats had a specific origin. It seemed that when a nearby condo was being built, was fixing to be built, somebody pointed out to the developer that they might run into permit problems because of the mice. No problem. He goes down to the animal shelter, adopts some cats, takes them out there, turns them loose, and mice were gone. And you had cats. Now, as it turns out, to complicate matters, there were some local ladies with political connections who were feeding the cats. They were out of mice, you see, so they were hungry. And the cat feeders were not about to allow the solution that one wag suggested, I won't say who, but you know him, that they hold a cat hunt. So the Condo and Ono coalition hired a professional trapper to humanely trap the cats and move them to another location. Problem was, they trapped the cat that wasn't feral. As a result, everything was thrown into court, and in the courts may very well be where it ends up. The best I know right now, the ramp still has not been built. Is that right? Yeah, okay. And there's another case, though, in which the courts seem to be siding with the rednecks. When Hurricane Ivan battered the beach in 2004, it destroyed the lodge at Gulf State Park. It was a simple, some would say a Spartan, that used to be right in there, it's not there anymore, a simple, some would say Spartan structure. There was even a suggestion once that the Alabama Historical Commission take it over and preserve it as a historical monument. Governor Bob Riley's administration began to lay plans for a convention center, an upscale hotel that would be there for conventions, and it would rent rooms twice the price of what they had been before. A number of people protested, saying that the arrangement was that there would always be in Alabama state parks a place for the average per capita and average family income of Alabamians. Those who had used the old facility had been regular folks. This one would be for upscale. Meanwhile, this went to court, and the state Supreme Court ruled that the plan was illegal, and it was a illegal extension of government leasing facility, and a victory, for the moment at least, for the rednecks. Meanwhile, more traditional beachgoers got another break. In the heady days of condomania and dolphin clubs, when they came to an end, the warning signs were all over the place. The housing bubble burst, and as one real estate agent put it, the flippers flopped. Pre-construction loans dried up. Grand plans were put on the shelf. Scores of units stood empty. And developers who did get financing began to turn from condominiums to hotels, something that could rent to regular folks. And then, just as things looked darkest, a light appeared. Condo prices fell even more, and began to see buyers who came from the middle class. People very much like people who used to go down to the coast are coming in once again and buying. Now, all of this was going on when I was trying to finish up the book. And I was going to finish it up. Everything looked fine. I was going down to the coast to do the final revisions. And then that hit. Which is one reason there's another chapter to the book. Even the disastrous BP Deepwater Horizon spill did not deter the people who are still going down to the beach. It slowed it a bit. But when the oil spill was cleaned up, and it was bad for a while, people went out to join Jimmy Buffett to celebrate the coast and all it had to offer. To help them party, another generation of raffish Rotarians, pirates with cash register eyeballs, and hard-handed matrons were there to help them. Though most of the Redneck Riviera has fallen dormant, the seeds of a new one might be there to sprout. The signs are all over the place. At the Deepwater Horizon spill, it was announced, finishing up, with the Deepwater Horizon spill, it was announced that some of the money would be used to hold concerts to attract more tourists down. One of the concerts that was scheduled was Leonard Skinner, whose song Free Bird has been called the Redneck National Anthem. Not everybody was happy with this. One critic wrote that every toothless redneck for 100 miles will bring their own bush and natty light and food, set up lawn chairs and groove to Sweet Home Alabama and go home. The only way for local businesses to make any money would be to open a cheap cigarette and Confederate bandana shop. But something else. The folks who collected at the concert were neither toothless rednecks nor yuppie sophisticates. The crowd looked and acted a lot like beach folks have always looked and acted. And why not? They were the children, in some cases the grandchildren of the people who've come over the years to fish and swim and ride rides at the amusement park, throw a mullet, stay up late at the watering holes, party during spring break, and generally do what they could not do, would not do at home. And in them, the Redneck Riviera lives on. As for the folks who weren't there, the ones who stayed comfortable and secure in their condos and gated communities, they missed a good time, and they never knew it. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, and we will give you a microphone to speak into.
But don't expect an answer.
The purpose of the microphone is so that all of the attendees in the next auditorium watching it on the screen can hear your question.
I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. Who was the attorney that was the Senate president involved in the Mullet case?
Okay, I knew somebody had asked that. He's in the book. It's not Ray Stanford, though. It was earlier. But this was in the 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Don't get it.
before my time.
All right. But, you know. Another one. Yes.
The microphone. Yes, I was down at the Gulf Shores this past Easter, I believe, and I noticed a historical marker detailing a brief history of the place. I think it said Governor Folsom back in the day established it as a state recreation area under the name, I believe, Pleasure Island.
Pleasure Island was.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, this may have even been a throwaway line. I don't know, because, you know, with Big Jim you could never tell for sure. But they were actually down there opening up a stretch of road, because this was the big thing, was getting some highway, and Folsom really loved asphalt. But he, in one of his speeches, and I think it was a 4th of July speech, he said, and you know, got all eloquent and everything at the end, and he said, and now I declare this to be Pleasure Island. And the name stuck. It was there have been other names for it, but that's the one that he gave it. He's the one. Yep. Anything else? Well, folks, it's been great. Thank you very much.